Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here. I've been to several book fairs this year, and this one in Tokyo looks more like the future of the book industry than any one I've been to. Because if you look around here, you don't see old paper books all that much. What you see is modern electronic technology, which is certainly where books are heading. So I'm going to actually give a little bit of history. As my colleague said, that we've worked together for almost 30 years. And over those 30 years, our understanding of what a book is has changed dramatically. But I'm going to start this talk off with this is a book that was written, I think, in the 1950s by Arthur Koestler, who wrote a famous novel called Darkness at Noon. This was a book he wrote about early astronomy. And in this book, he referred to the book that nobody read. The book that nobody read, in his mind, was Copernicus's De Revolutionibus, which is the book where Copernicus said it was the Earth moving around the sun, not the other way around. So a number of years later, there's an astronomer at Harvard University who has read this book about the book that nobody read. And then he one day finds himself in the fantastic library in Dublin at Trinity College. And he's holding in his hand a first edition of De Revolutionibus. And what he notices is that on the right-hand side, that's where the printed text is. But on the left-hand side, he notices that there's a lot of margin notes, which he thinks is sort of, which he thinks is surprising if it's a book that nobody read, that there should be so many notes in the margin. So over the next 20 years, he makes it a hobby of looking at every single first or second edition of Copernicus that he can find. And he looks at over 200 of them. And what he reports is that in most of them, almost all of them, there's extensive conversation going on in the margin. And not just one person's notes necessarily, often several people are talking. The teacher lends the book to his students, the students talk to each other in the margin of the book. So this brings me to the talk, and this won't be long, don't worry. What is a book? When I grew up, a book was that object that I sat in a chair and buried my head in it for hours. And in fact, in the dictionary, it's still described as a set of written, printed, or blank sheets bound together in a volume. During the period when we were making CD-ROMs, we changed our definition of a book to include audio and video on the page. But it was still a fixed object that didn't change. And then the internet came along, and we started to change our vision of what a book was we started to talk about a book being the mechanism that humans use to move ideas around time and space. But even that definition, the understanding was still that the book was something, it was an archive. You went and you got something from it and you brought it to yourself. So about 5 years ago, I founded something called the Institute for the Future of the Book, and we started doing some experiments in new forms of books that under the category, the networked book. So one of our very first experiments, there was a professor in New York who was about to write a history of atheism, and he was going to spend a year doing research. So I asked him, would he be willing to do his research in public? Would he think out loud? So every day for a year, he posted into this blog what he was reading, what he was thinking about, questions that he had. And as you can see here from this one post, he gathered a group of future readers who went on this journey with him of trying to do the research and understand the question of the history of atheism. I'm waiting for a prop. Just a book. Ah, thank you. So It's okay. When you write a book, you do a lot of work before it gets published. You read other people's writings, you read papers, you talk to your friends, you talk to your colleagues. There's a whole process that goes on before the book is printed. And so what we did here really is we captured this process that led up to the book that he eventually wrote. So the next experiment we did was at the other end. It was after a book was written. So this is a book by another professor in New York. He's a philosopher, a media theorist. It's a book he wrote about the critical theory of video games. When my colleagues in New York designed this for purely graphic reasons, they took the comments section that normally show up below the author and moved it to the right. But within a few hours of this going online, a very rich conversation started to emerge over here. Okay, however, it was built on blogging software. But something happened when we took the comments and put them up here. Something magical started to happen, because we realized that all of a sudden the author and the reader were occupying the same space. The hierarchy of print, where the author is up there and the reader is down here, was suddenly being flattened. Not all the way, but it was much flatter. Like a professor in a seminar, the author may have set the subject, he may have known more than everybody else in the room, but he was trusting the readers to help him deepen their collective understanding of the subject. So if the first experiment, we were showing what happened before the book was written, in this second experiment, we were capturing the conversation that the book caused after it was printed. So then, actually, that last experiment was covered very widely in the press in the United States. And a lot of people came to us and they said, that's very interesting, we'd like to do that ourselves. So we made this thing called Comment Press, where you could put a regular text and have a conversation. This was for a class in English literature, in 20 students in one class. And you see here there are 21 comments just on this one paragraph. Many teachers have used this, and they all say the same thing. It changes the boundaries of the classroom. Because the conversation that starts in the classroom continues when the students go to the library and go home, because they're always working with each other in the margin. And so the conversation goes with them all day, comes back to the classroom the next day. It's seamless. It flows seamlessly. So the last experiment we did in this series was this one. Doris Lessing, Golden Notebook. She won the Nobel Prize 2 years ago, and this is her most famous novel. I'd read this book when I was very young and decided to reread it a couple of years ago, just before she won the Nobel Prize. And I was thinking how interesting it would be to have a conversation between somebody in my generation and somebody who was the age I was when I first read it, in my early 20s. And then when she won the Nobel Prize, I realized, gee, we could really do this, and we could do it using Comment Press. So HarperCollins gave us the text of the book, and with a little bit of funding from the British Arts Council, we recruited these 7 women, ranging from about 60 to their early 20s. They're historians and novelists. And so this is on the left-hand side, you see one page of text from the book. And on the right-hand side, you see the conversation just about this one page. The 7 women, they didn't know each other before this experiment, and some lived in Europe and some lived in the Western United States, so 9 hours between them. They loved the experience of reading this together. I think what we proved here was the viability of an asynchronous reading group. So, I mean, normally today, if you're in a reading group, you have to be in your neighbor's living room on the 3rd Thursday of every month. But now I realize that it's possible to have a reading group with people I went to university with, one who lives in Buenos Aires, one who lives in California, one who lives in London. Time and space now are not an issue for reading together. So now I talk about a book being a place where readers and sometimes authors come together. And, okay. So we're releasing next month a new version of Comment Press that's quite beautiful. This is that same story from before, the short story, Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. And it works beautifully, and everybody who's had the experience of reading together in Comment Press, everybody's found it a very such a completely new and exciting way to read, because now there are many eyes brought on the problem. The ability the collective wisdom of a group in reading turns out to be of quite a bit of value. But one thing I think that's important to realize is that this is still a web page. And it has all the flatness of a web page. The very beautiful, multimodal, multi-layered things that we could make with CD-ROM has been missing from the web. So, we've been working for a long time now on something called SOFI. And the point of SOFI is to merge the elegant design capabilities of the CD-ROM era with the social networking capabilities of the contemporary web. SOFI is an extremely powerful authoring environment that will make beautiful documents with a social networking component. For example, this is an edition of The Wasteland, the famous poem by T.S. Eliot. This document that I'm showing you right now is running just on my machine. But SOFI 2.0, which comes out in December, this document will be able to sit right in a web page without any additional software. So you can hear Eliot read this poem.
April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land.
So he'll read the whole poem, and the pages will turn as he reads.
Dull roots with spring rain.
Great.
Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnbergersee with a shower of rain. We stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten.
You also get Eliot's notes that he wrote about the poem himself. But you also get a live comment window. So anybody in the world who had this book open on their machine would see my note right then. The first time that I was showing somebody this capability in my office one day, a little book I had made with an essay, and while I was showing it to her, a friend of mine in Paris who was reading it, this was not set up. He just put a note in the margin, and suddenly it popped up there. And all of a sudden, this page, which for my entire life had been static, was alive. The book really was a place where something was happening. So, to finish up, this is a little boy in London. His mother described his reading behavior to me. She said he'll be reading a book, and then he'll put it down. He goes to his computer and logs into a website where his friends who are also reading that same book are leaving notes for each other. Then he picks up the book again and reads for a while, and then puts it down and Googles something that occurs to him while he's reading. And then he'll pick up the book again, and then he'll go back to the computer, pick up the book, go back to the computer, back and forth, back and forth. It occurred to me, why don't we just redefine reading to include all of those behaviors, not just the time when he's holding the book in his hand. So just to end, I think that our great-grandchildren or our grandchildren, depending on your age, will think of reading and writing as social experiences, something they do with others. In Mexico City last week, somebody asked me a question. They said, "Oh, so you're saying the computer makes reading and writing social?" And I said, "No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Reading and writing have always been social, back from the very beginning. That was the whole point of the prologue. What happens when you put ideas into a solid frozen object like this is that you obscure, you hide the social relations that are really there all the time. And then when we take these contents and put them into a digital network, that's when the social relations come forward and we can see them more clearly." So, thank you very much.